Tonight's talk is going to be the last one, I promise, in our series entitled Roadblock or Signpost. This has been a series of talks in Christian apologetics, which had its origin in Castlereagh Fellowship's Sunday evening planning group, when one of our number proposed the idea of doing a number of talks based upon common objections to belief in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and how we might seek to turn these objections on their head and make them into a signpost to faith in Jesus. And so, in what has grown to a 23-part series, we have considered a whole raft of subjects, of topics. There being many ways to God, Christians being hypocrites, or Christians being judgmental, or Christians always fighting each other, or of the incompatibility of science with belief in God, or the claim that becoming a Christian constitutes intellectual suicide, or the lack of proof for the central Christian claims, or that the Bible is unreliable, or that the New Testament is in contradiction to the Old Testament, or of Christianity just not being for me, or of my possessing my own spirituality and therefore no need of your Christianity, or of Christianity simply being your truth but not mine, or of the incompatibility of suffering with the existence of a supposedly loving and all-powerful God, or of religion doing more harm than good, or of Christianity being oppressive, or of the incompatibility of a God of love sending people to a lost eternity in hell, or of Christianity being simply a crutch for weak people, or of people being essentially good and therefore not needing salvation, or of God being a moral monster, or God being a cosmic killjoy, or of the Jesus that is presented by historic Christianity being only one among a number of interpretations of what Jesus was really like. So we've quite a back catalogue. But that does leave one, which in a sense could be considered the most basic, and where many of the above objections just cited often lead. Namely, there is no God. God doesn't exist. Certainly not the God of the Christian's beloved Bible. And hence this final talk will address that drastic conclusion that the Christian God is a falsehood. Now, it has been the pattern to break each talk up into, first of all, a number of points of defence against the particular charge in question, before turning the tables and offering a counterattack or points of offence, albeit, as I'm fond of saying, hopefully not in an offensive manner. But this time, given that this is the last talk in the series, I promise, I'm going to break with that mode. Not, I trust, by becoming obnoxious, but I'm not going to do the same pattern as before. What I want to do on this occasion is just offer a 10-point list of reasons why I believe that the charge that the Christian God doesn't exist doesn't hold up. And given that I am very much an amateur in the field of apologetics, I think you'll find my reasons very accessible. You certainly aren't going to come across any great philosophical argumentation in the next 25 minutes, but hopefully some down-to-earth, sensible observations that we can all relate to. So what then are my 10 points? Well, number one is concerning the question of origins. The question of origins. I am not a scientist, and I do not pretend to understand all the complexities of the scientific debate around the origin of the universe or of human life. However, I would direct you to the excellent talk that Reuben did in this series under the catchy title of Science Has Buried God, which I'm informed you can still watch for free on Castlereagh Fellowship's YouTube channel. But even as a lay person, I just cannot accept the atheist's assumption that basically something happened out of nothing, that the universe just appeared, and that life spontaneously emerged out of some primordial soup. To my simple mind, the Bible's claim that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth makes much more sense of origins than that the universe either has always existed or that it somehow created itself. And even within the scientific community, that latter idea of the universe being eternal is now rejected. Likewise, I find the Genesis narrative that God made man in his own image far more compelling than the Darwinian concept that man evolved from lesser life forms going all the way back to some microscopic organism. For me, it requires a bigger stretch of the imagination to buy into theories such as multiverses or jumps between species than it does to accept the plain words of Scripture. So the first point is concerning origins. The second point is the evidence of design. The evidence of design. Personally, I find the design argument absolutely compelling as evidence for a creator God. Think of the fine-tuning of this world. For example, that the earth is just the right distance from the sun to enable human life to exist. Neither too close for the earth to burn up or too far away for it to freeze over. Or think of the wonder of the human body, of its cell structure, and the marvel of the human brain, well, most human brains anyway. Think of human DNA, all of that encoded genetic information which appears in exactly the right order. And that's to say nothing of the staggering beauty of the natural world, the awe-inspiring mountains and the wonders of the depths of the oceans. Is it all a fluke? Is it all the product of mindless chance events and mutations? Or is it evidence of a divine intelligence? Honestly, what makes more sense? Thirdly, man's sense of the divine. Man's sense of the divine. Back as far as the historical evidence will take us, man has always possessed a sense of the divine. He has always exhibited a proclivity to worship. Yes, this has resulted in the worship of natural forces and man-made gods. But my point is that man has always had a sense that there is something outside of himself which exercises control over our world. Man is, if you like, a naturally religious species. Wasn't it C.S. Lewis who said that the desire to worship is as innate in man as the desire for food or sex? And just as the desire for food or sex reflects the existence of the means of satisfying those desires, so too does man's desire to worship reflect the existence of God. We are made to worship. God has implanted that desire within us, and we will not be completely at peace with ourselves unless that desire to worship is satisfied. As Augustine famously expressed it, our heart is restless until it rests in you, in God. Number 4, man's possession of a moral faculty. Man's possession of a moral faculty. One of the biggest challenges to the atheist is to explain man's moral nature. Where does our sense of right and wrong, of justice and injustice, of fairness and unfairness come from? And evolutionary biology is particularly weak on this point. The best that it can come up with is to postulate some link with whatever is best for the survival of humanity. But how does that explain compassion for the weak, compassion for the disabled or the sick? Or others will say that morality just is, like physical laws, moral laws just are. To me, as a logical explanation, that is scraping the barrel. Somewhat more feasible, others will say that morality is a social construct, that our moral code depends upon what society or a majority of people presently considers as acceptable or unacceptable. But that does not sit well with our sense of universal rights and wrongs, that no matter the historical epoch in view, nor the particular culture in view, we just know that some things are good and others are beyond the pale. Moreover, sometimes majorities can embrace horrendous things. Witness what went on in Nazi Germany with the extermination of 6 million Jews. Is not a better explanation of morality that our Creator God implanted a moral code within each one of us? He has given us a conscience, and it is that conscience which convicts us of our wrongdoing, as well as giving us the capacity to identify wrongdoing in others. Point number 5, man's sense of human significance, of his own significance. I don't mean that then to sound as I'm promoting arrogance or pride. I simply mean that we have a sense that we are more than a mere collection of atoms and chemicals. As our good friend Jim Crooks is fond of saying, we are magnificent, rational, moral beings made in the image of God. We are not a mere animal. We have the ability to reason, to make choices, to make plans for the future, to love selflessly, to advocate on behalf of the weak, and so on. We have a sense that our lives matter, that we really do count for something. We are not mere dust, here today, gone tomorrow. The atheistic mindset, or at least the honest atheistic mindset, is just so bleak in comparison to the sense of value promulgated by the Christian worldview. Point number 6, our sense of the hereafter. Our sense of the hereafter. So coupled with the previous point about our sense of our own significance is the sense that you and I possess that there is something beyond this life. When we bury a corpse in the earth, does that feel that that is just the end? Or do we have even a nagging doubt that there's something beyond the grave? Of course, the atheist will decry any notion of an afterlife as mere wish fulfillment. But is it not something that has been implanted within us by an eternal deity? Something that tells us that the immaterial part of our person survives the death of the body. As the Bible puts it, God has set eternity in the human heart. Ecclesiastes 3:11. And I should say, this is not all about, the prospect of, say, being reunited with departed loved ones. The belief in an afterlife is also bound up with notions of divine justice. That there is reward for those who have lived well, but there's also a fitting punishment for the oppressors and tyrants of our world. Do we believe that when Hitler took the cowardly measure of blowing his own brains out, that was the final word for him? Or is there something that tells us that his punishment was only just about to begin? Point number 7, the presence of evil and of the supernatural. The presence of evil and of the supernatural. How does the pure materialist explain the truly dark side of humanity? Surely it cannot all be put down to the survival of the fittest. Take instances of child abuse, some involving the most horrific stories of perverse cruelty, as we have become all too familiar with from our news feeds. Is there not a malevolent power behind such atrocities? I know that the presence of evil is a challenge for the Christian, and we've made some effort to address that in this series, namely the talks on God doesn't care and God is a moral monster. But the atheist too has to offer some sort of explanation. What can the atheist come up with to explain the likes of that horrendous child abuse that we hear about, or terrible cruelty? Just that stuff happens. Or it's all the fault of society or it's all a failure of education. I find that far from satisfying as a convincing explanation of the evils in our world. And then there's the issue of the miraculous. Is it fair to write off all extraordinary events as mere coincidences or psychosomatic experiences? Sometimes the medical profession is simply confounded by the recovery of patients in an apparent answer to prayer. And I suspect that most of us can think of personal events and experiences which just seem to defy logical explanation and present prima facie evidence of an outside power at work in our lives. Point number 8, the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. So far, much of what I have said could perhaps be applied to belief in any deity, or certainly to belief in a personal deity, rather than exclusively to belief in the Christian God. So my last 3 points are going to be specific to the Christian faith. And the first of these, so this is point 8 in total, is the amazing fulfillment of biblical prophecy. In particular, the fulfillment of prophecies relating to the birth, life, and death of Jesus himself. It's estimated that as many as 350 Old Testament prophecies were fulfilled by Jesus at what we call his first advent or his first coming. And some of these prophecies are incredibly detailed, such as the place of his birth or what happened to his clothes at his death. Moreover, a passage like Isaiah chapter 53, which speaks so powerfully of the Messiah who would die a substitutionary atoning death, was penned some 750 years before Jesus' birth. And please do not fall for the lie that the Bible has been corrupted and rewritten by Christians. And again, I would refer you to the talk in this series on the reliability of the Scriptures. How is the honest atheist going to explain how such prophecies were so clearly fulfilled? Coincidence and the defiance of probability have to be stretched to ludicrous proportions for that to all happen by chance. Surely a better explanation is that God inspired his prophets to foretell what would be so, and in his sovereignty, the events came to pass exactly as predicted. Number 9, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Keeping with the twin themes of prophecy and the miraculous, there is no greater evidence for faith in the Christian God than the bodily resurrection of Jesus. This is, of course, the very cornerstone of the Christian faith. Upon it, historical Christianity rises or falls. Now, the thinking atheist has to be able to come up with an explanation of how this foretold and historically documented event, they've got to explain what happened to Jesus' body. Many theories have been propounded. Jesus didn't really die, he only fainted. The disciples stole the body. Jesus' followers suffered from mass hallucinations, more wish fulfillment. Christians added the story of physical resurrection to, no pun intended, raise Jesus' appeal. Or it's just all myth and legend and so on. But many who have conducted a serious examination of the evidence, including some at the very apex of the legal profession, have concluded that the best explanation of the empty tomb is that Jesus actually rose from the dead. Regrettably, many atheists won't even contemplate that possibility. Their worldview predisposes them to refuse to engage with the evidence for Jesus' claimed resurrection. But surely, given the gravity of what is at stake, that has to be an unwise approach. Some scientists and some philosophers, atheistic scientists and philosophers, some of them are at least honest enough to admit that they dare not allow a divine footprint in the door. But that seems to me to be a ridiculous and unworthy position to adopt by those who are supposedly disciples of facts, scientists, and those who are supposedly open to debating all manner of ideas, philosophers. And finally, point 10, the evidence of transformed lives. The evidence of transformed lives. So my final piece of evidence for the rejection of the belief that the God of Christianity is a falsehood is the transformation in the lives of countless persons who have embraced Jesus as their personal Saviour and Lord, down through history and continuing to the present moment. Personal faith in God's Son has resulted in people who were previously marked by selfishness, by hatred, by addiction, and much else, having their lives turned around. For some, it has been a spectacular overnight transformation. For many others, it's a much more gradual change, but the change is undeniable. Try telling such persons that it's all an illusion, that they have just swallowed a lie. No, they know that something real has happened to them. They have had an experience of the love and forgiveness of God, and they have discovered meaning and fulfillment as a consequence. And although I might be accused of being now excessively subjective, may I say that that has been my experience as well. You will have a very difficult task on your hands, convincing me that there is no God. For some 35 years ago, I had a spiritual encounter with Jesus Christ, which changed the direction of my life, and that undoubtedly for the better. So may I conclude by stating that I utterly reject the claim that there is no God. And I finish with 3 thoughts. First, for you to declare that you know there is no God is to make the very boldest of claims. Indeed, we might say that you have elevated yourself into your own God, claiming a knowledge that is really beyond your rightful ken. Secondly, I would plead with you to ask yourself if, in all honesty, you are not guilty of what the Apostle Paul calls suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. Such is your determination to live as you choose, to live independently, to be your own boss of your own life, you willfully deny and defy overwhelming evidence for the existence of the Creator. And third, is not life without belief in God an ultimately bleak existence? For life loses any real significance. And as you face life's inevitable hardships and sufferings, you do so without the comforting knowledge that you are loved by a divine Creator who offers the prospect of living a meaningful life now and of a glorious future for those who place their trust in His Son. There is a God, and one day you will answer to Him.